Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Happy Teacher Project podcast. I'm Chris Sibbald and I'm your host on the podcast, and I just want to give you a little bit about my background. I taught in the UK for 20 years in secondary. I started off my career in the West End of Newcastle as an ICT teacher and worked my way in the second department, head of department, and then for different reasons in terms of politics, that school was closed, and I moved on and I worked in the Peru. That was a bit closer to home, and that was where I first experienced burnout. And I want that a little bit more detail a little bit later on. And I took a short sabbatical from teaching because of that burnout, and then I was sucked back in, doing a little bit of supply. You got to pay the mortgage, you got to pay the bills, as we all know. Started off doing a bit part-time work for a college in Durham. Really enjoyed that. Doing 3 days, and I was doing 4 days, then I was full-time, and I was head of department, and I was head of sixth form, and I was doing the both together, and then I ended up being burnt out again. So I taught business, really enjoyed my last role, the pastoral role, but not so much the teaching in the end. So the purpose of this podcast, something I've been thinking about doing for a while, but the whole purpose is to help teachers like you not go through what I had to go through. Because one of the issues with burnout is you don't know you're burnout until it's too late. So if you can identify the signs early, put some interventions into place, that can make a huge difference to your life. By the end of the episode, you're going to know what burnout looks like, what those warning signs are, and how it can creep up on you. And before you know it, you're much deeper than you would have thought. So what I'm going to do first of all is just look at burnout in a little bit more detail. So my teaching background experience was teaching was always something I really enjoyed. And the best part of the job was building relationships with the students. You have a bit of a laugh. You only had your free reign to kind of teach how you wanted to, as long as you were getting results. And, I think there was a big shift, particularly after the crash, the bank crash around 2009. But the change had already started to come into about accountability. And you would be accountable for every single student in your class, and that's fine. That's nothing wrong with that. But it just seemed to be a bit excessive. You're accountable for someone who you never saw for 6 months, and you had to justify what you've been doing, and the data are ramping up. And I remember going back to the days of Fisher Family Trust and all the data entry, and you using the data to track the students and things like that, and the constant Ofsted pressure. I remember the school I worked in Newcastle, basically our CPD for about 3 years was, Ofsted's coming in next week, Ofsted's coming in any time, and it was absolutely draining. And, it does take its toll at the end of the week. You just really tired, you've got no energy left, you're constantly on the go. But I would say it was probably manageable, it was doable, really enjoyed it. I had a brilliant team, all worked well together. But as things change later on, as I'm sure you'll all recognise, is that never-ending to-do list, and particularly in the last 5 to 6 years, things have changed an awful lot, particularly post-pandemic. There's less money in the budgets, which means there's less staff, bigger class sizes. The to-do list is never ending. You're doing duties, you're covering classes when you wouldn't normally be covering classes, the data entry, the marking, all that administration paperwork, the never ending new initiatives. Then you had, um, bringing new ways um, of teaching students, retrieval practice and this and that and that. And all, I can say that and see the benefits of that. But a common issue that comes up with a lot of teachers that I work with now is that the lack of freedom. Your classroom was kind of your place where you would teach in your way and you'd still get the results. Whereas now that's kind of changing. This is, bog standard PowerPoint you've got to follow and it's got to have the same things in. You've all got to cover these things. And it does take its toll. In the way, for me, one of the big issues that the first time I experienced burnout in the Peru was just a constant abuse. Not so much physical, but it did occur, was just the verbal abuse constantly. People tell you to fuck off and swearing and damaging rooms and this and that, and they don't want to do it. And I don't know about yourself, but I got into teaching to help people. And a lot of teachers find themselves or people pleasers. And when things aren't going well, things aren't working well, you kind of look inwards, don't you? And you think, well, what am I not doing right here? If the kids tell me to fuck off, they don't want to do my lesson, what am I doing wrong? What could I do differently? And realistically, yes, you can do that. But in those circumstances, there's very little that you can do. So, I struggled to kind of reframe it. And I was taking all these things is on board physically and emotionally. And it ended up getting to the point where I just couldn't go back. And I ended up getting signed off with stress. Even just driving past the school. Remember the first time I had to go in for a meeting, sitting in the car park, my heart felt it was going to literally burst through my chest. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And it was just that constant being ground down. And even the thoughts of school would just bring terror. And probably my lowest point, and I remember sitting or lying in bed one night, was just thinking that actually I'd think I'd rather be dead than have to go back. And I can remember lying in bed and having these thoughts. I can't remember if I actually went downstairs and sat in the kitchen, but I can remember, I think, what knife could I use to kill myself with, things like that. And it got that bad. So I knew I had to do something about it. And that's why I left. And I took a long time to turn that around, and a long time to bring me back from the brink. Something I mentioned on a post recently is, remember, even going to Morrison's, just getting a handful of things was a massive big deal. I was trying to take my card out of the wallet, my hand shaking, trying to remember the pin and pack the shopping and put the pin in, and that was a massive big deal. I sat in the house for months. Felt like my brain was on fire. Didn't want to go out, didn't want to engage with anything. And it's can be different for everyone, but second time around when I was burnt out, I think the pandemic, which it did for a lot of people, made people consider and question what they're doing. Is this really the life they want to be leading? Is this really what they can say themselves doing till they retire? And one of the biggest changes for me from the pandemic was going back, and it affected students as well. But it was more about that the students weren't interested. They didn't want to be there. And my superpower had always been I could teach anybody, even the worst classes. I'd always taught, being given because I was able to deal with them and I could get on with anybody. And I seemed to lose that skill, or the superpower I had didn't work anymore because students weren't as bothered. They're just turning up, didn't want to do anything, didn't expect to be given work. When they did, they didn't like it. They'd throw you under the bus quite happily in parental meetings. They'd, lie in front of your face saying that you'd never given the work, you'd never done this. And, thankfully, on a couple of occasions, other students in the class did say what they had done and that kind of back you up. But it was just that relentless expectations on the teaching, all the data had to enter, constantly being learning walked, lesson observations. And for me, standard of my lesson observation with kind of all these changes had kind of come down a little bit. The things that used to work weren't working. But I think also I just didn't have the energy. And for me, I'd ended up, what made me go off was the fact I think, looking back now, it was a bit of a poor show, really. I was took aside by a member at the senior leadership team, is a fairly new member of the team. This was 10 months before the Easter half term, and basically told that a lesson observational learning walk I had about 4 to 6 weeks ago wasn't particularly good. Yes, it took them that long to give us the feedback, and that was going to be going on an informal plan, and there's going to be these people supporting us. And I remember I was just in shock because I'd had no idea that anything like this was going to happen, and the first instance, when I left the meeting, I was just in absolute shock. I felt like crying. I just, that person being, one of, has always been that teacher people went to for support when they were struggling. It was now full circle. I was the one who was being questioned, and people, were saying that was issues with my teaching. I remember I felt like crying, and as I was driving home, and I think I'd phoned my partner, and I was actually had tears going through mine, going to her, and I just couldn't believe it. The way it was done was really, really poor. And then I kind of got home, and I thought about it a little bit, and I thought, well, actually, reframe this as you do. This is an opportunity to improve me teaching and all that. So I kind of emailed back and said, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah, I'm really happy to be working with you. It's a great opportunity, blah, 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 can improve me teaching, all this sort of shit, basically. And it wasn't until the night time later on, I was just maybe sunk in the next few days. I was just like, what? How's this come to this? And it was going through my mind all that half term, and it wasn't until the night before when I was, do I go back? And it took us that couple of weeks to it all to sink into it. Actually, hang on, something's not right here. I am burnt out. Something's not right. So I'd end up phoning sick, and then I'd spoke to my GP, and they said it sounds that it's very much struggling with work-related stress and burnout potentially. So I ended up going off the thing, and I actually never went back. But it took us a few months or weeks and months to realise that, hang on, all these symptoms, all these things that actually I'd been put in the back of my mind, that I'd felt like walking out of school a few times. I was going home. I was kind of segregating myself, cutting myself off from my family. All these sort of things were warning signs. And I think for me, one of the things that struggled was me teaching. And, I never, I need to use the weekends and the evenings just to come out constantly tired. So I knew, and I did think about going back, but I just knew that, particularly after COVID, that I needed to do something else. I wasn't prepared to let teaching finish me off physically and mentally. And I think if I had went back to teaching, I don't think it would have necessarily kind of ended in a good place for myself. And also I wasn't prepared to give up my mental and physical health for a job that would replace you within 24 hours, So actually, what is burnout? I've touched on a bit there about myself and what I suffered with and some of the symptoms there. But burnout is particularly prevalent in the caring professions, teaching, most definitely, nurses, things like that. People who work in care homes, people normally go into these jobs, they are people pleasers, they want to help people. And over time, that becomes more difficult to do with the pressures and the expectations that you're given. And it's not just that feeling of tiredness, or you feel emotional, or you feel a little bit stressed. It's that physical, but also mental exhaustion, that There's nothing wrong with being stressed. There's nothing wrong with having periods of stress, but it's when it's every single day, every single week. This is when burnout occurs. The way that I like to explain is I felt as though my whole body was kind of underwater, just so much stress. And the way that I used to feel the sensation was that my whole head was on fire. I felt like my brain was on fire. You're always on. You'd never switched off. That heightened state of the technical term for it is arousal, is alertness. You're always switched on. You'll notice the difference between when you're happy and you're relaxed and you're calm. But when you are switch on, you may be sitting a bit straighter. Your are turning on. You've got that cortisol is kind of going through your body, and that's what it can look like. The signs just never, ever catching up on that sleep. You're always tired. You're just constantly checking your emails. You constantly think of that to-do list. So what is very important is kind of spotting the warning signs for you. What they might look like, what they can be. And there is a lot of similarity, but there can also be differences in people's. So it might start off with some of the emotional signs. So you're feeling very, very kind of detached. You've lost your love, your enthusiasm for teaching. You're kind of irritable. You're snapping at the kids. You're snapping at your family, your own children. You're feeling numb inside. You just feel like you're going through the motions. Some of the physical signs can be that's just constant fatigue. Even after half term, you're still going back to work exhausted. Or even maybe if you're finishing work on a Friday, you're literally sitting in sofa surfing all weekend, eating comfort food. You're still going back in on the Monday. Maybe getting those Sunday scaries, that knot in your stomach and with butterflies maybe. Sometimes even on a Saturday. Headaches. A lot of people really suffer from migraines, or you just getting that tension in your head, and that's really causing problems. Burnout often shows up in your body first, the tension in certain points. Some people get it in their calves, in their legs, in their head, shoulders maybe, things like that. And that stress, it stays there. Some of the mental signs that you can experience, overthinking. Something that I used to do a lot was that I'd be, maybe I had a bad lesson. I'm going back and think, well, what could I have done this? Could I try this differently with them? Maybe could have asked that question a different way. Maybe if I planned better, maybe I've done this. And often, people see that as a bit of a weakness, but most teachers rather do care about what they do, and they beat themselves up and they tend to work harder. So when you are overthinking, when you're all replaying in your mind over and over again, you're lying awake. What could I, why am I shit? Why am I failing? How come I've done this lesson? And actually, I planned, put lots of work in, and it turned out absolutely rubbish. And it starts to impact your confidence. You start to doubt yourself. You feel like you're failing. Maybe you've had that data entry, and actually the students that would normally be getting a certain grade or far off them in certain heads of department, okay, in SLT, are starting to maybe ask questions, or you had a learner walk and it wasn't as good as it normally is. Behavior changes in yourself. Again, these can be often quite subtle, and it's our body and our mind kind of trying to protect myself. So for me, it was withdrawal. I would kind of withdraw from society. I just want to come home. I want to have my tea. I want to have a shower, a bath, and I'd want to go to bed. And I'd just want to watch some, rubbish, just to switch off, mentally switch off. And then by 9 o'clock, right, I've got to turn the light off. I've got to be ready for tomorrow. Didn't have a social life during the week. And even got to the point I didn't have a social life on the weekend. So when I come home on a Friday, again, have some tea, have a bath, have a shower, go to bed, kind of When I was burnt our first time round, I found myself going to bed on a Friday, sometimes 4:30, 5 o'clock. I'd go kind of over at my parents. I'd be talking to them about what was going on, talk to my partner. They don't understand. Oh, just get over it. Go out and get some fresh air. And that caused a lot of frustration, well, because they just don't get it. They don't know what you're going through. So I'd withdraw even more. Spend all days, Saturday, Sunday in the house. Then I'm thinking about, oh, God, I've got to go to work on Monday. And one of the things with the behavioural changes as well, for some people, it can be, is eating junk food, drinking alcohol, maybe recreational drugs, things like that. It's all stuff to make you feel better. You're trying to comfort yourself because you're absolutely on your knees, you're feeling shit. And what happens with that is, well, your world gradually gets smaller and smaller and smaller. You think back to maybe at the beginning of your teaching career, or some of the best times of your teaching career, you probably had a social life during the week, probably going out and doing things on a weekend, and doing this and doing that and whatever. And you get a bad lesson, bit of a bad day. It wasn't really that important. But as you get more and more burnt out, your world becomes smaller. So maybe that naughty student, that bad lesson you had, or that bad day, or the bad lesson observation, instead of being that little tiny thing, that would you probably, it's all right, you wouldn't really worry about. It becomes a massive thing, because it's a massive thing in a tiny little world, and then it starts playing on you a bit, and then the whole cycle starts to begin again. The emotional, the physical, the mental signs, your behavior. So, what can you actually do? Steps to take if you do see the sign. Well, like I mentioned there, it's difficult to speak to people who aren't involved in the education sector. Because they think, I wouldn't put up with that, just tell them this and all this type of stuff, They don't know what you've got to do. It's very challenging. So do you have a colleague? Do you have a friend at work? Do you have a line manager who is nice, who will listen? It doesn't have to be even official. Just, can you have a bit of a conversation with them? But before you even get that way, the first thing you need to do, and probably the most difficult thing, is acknowledging yourself. That's the problem. Because what we normally do, things aren't working. What do? We start working harder. So instead of spending maybe half an hour, 30, 40 minutes on the lesson plan, you're now spending an hour and a half on that lesson plan. You're getting everything right. You're making everything perfect. And then it still doesn't work. So it's admitting that something's not right. Maybe to yourself, maybe to your partner as well. It's difficult. A lot of the teachers I work with are experienced members of staff, like myself, even on a senior leadership team. I was having a conversation with exactly this, and a client was actually a head teacher, a very experienced deputy, and they were also been in a headship role, and this exactly happened to them. So it's acknowledging yourself that something's not right. The sooner you can do that, the better it is. The easier it's going to be to kind of pull yourself back from the brink. And if you can't find that colleague, that person, fellow professional, even just a friend, I suppose, who's a good listener, just having a conversation with them, talking to them, unburdening yourself. And that does help, even if you're not actively addressing the issue, talking about it does make a difference. One of the most important things you do is actually putting yourself first. As teachers, and I'm sure people that have got children as well, you're always putting yourself second. You're always last in the queue. You're always last when you're giving yourself the food, or you're last when you pouring yourself a drink, things like that. And we'll do it in a professional life as well. And that I'm going to go home, or I'm just going to stay a little bit later, or when I am getting home, I'll have me tea. Then I'm going to do that data. Then I'm going to do those reports. Then I've just got to do this. Then I've just got to do that. And again, when you put yourself second, or you put yourself last, it does catch up with you. You've got to start small. Even if it's maybe just, reading a book. before you go to sleep, having a bath away from your phone, putting your phone on silent, putting your phone on do not disturb, going for a day night, little things, put a movie on an evening. You're not thinking about work. Maybe going for a run. Do you like going to the gym? Do you like just very simply, just taking the dog for a walk for 30 minutes or something? What can you do maybe on an evening? What can you do on a weekend? That is for you. Because when you start to build those things into your week, into your day, maybe just listen to a podcast even, just starts to make your world a little bit bigger. Just starts to, you see the good things. You see the positive things that I used to see. And in terms of professional help, there's lots of different places that you can go to. Speaking to your GP, for me, would always be a good place to start. It doesn't have to be going in and you want to be getting signed off. Just go and having a conversation, taking some advice. What I found was when you speak to a professional, someone who's impartial, a much more powerful conversation, because they come and having a conversation from completely impartiality, which if you're talking to a colleague, you're talking to a family member, it's not. So there's those people. Again, you can talk to your line manager, and they could refer you to the provider that kind of they are either subscribe to, or they pay, or they work with. Many schools are still with the local authority, so you can be referred through kind of occupational health. They're really good. You can have a conversation. You can could potentially access some of their services, whether that is counselling or whatever, things like that. The school I work with, they had an app, and you could go onto that app, and I kind of accessed some counselling for that. Personally, I found the counselling didn't really work. I've had counselling twice, and all you're basically doing is you're kind of going through the past. You just, and it can be worthwhile to look over and maybe identify some things that you didn't maybe notice and maybe talk through. But it's always looking backwards. Wasn't really looking forward to and taking action and making change. And that's some of the thing that I do with the clients who I work with. It's important to acknowledge what's happened, but it'll look forward. And that's the key thing when I work with teachers, is we'll come up with some goals, we'll move forward about solving problems, getting your life back, making you happy, putting a smile on your face. It's not about just rerunning the past and, chewing over it. So yeah, having a bit of think, what could you do? And one of the reasons I mentioned at the beginning of this, I've briefly mentioned, and I've kind of skimmed over my experience, because could have been here all day, but you're not alone. One of the places I joined that helped us to get out of teaching was Adventures After Teaching with Joe Howard, which is an excellent place to go to if you are looking to believe in teaching. But what I found so useful on there, got a Saturday call, just turn up, bring a cuppa, and you just hear people talk, talking about what they're going through. And one of the most powerful things was, that's me. They're saying how I'm feeling. Because a lot of the time you go into school and you, hi there, good morning. People don't really mean it. It's just bullshit. Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. You're not fine, but you're telling them that you're fine. It's actually acknowledging and saying that many people are going through exactly the same thing that you are, but they just don't want to acknowledge it because it's frowned upon. There's still a bit of a stigma attached, particularly in education thing a bit. So, for me, the really important part of doing this is to let you that you are not alone. There are people who have been there, done it, been through what you are going through. But it's to let you know that there is hope there. You can get out the other side. It doesn't have to be, right? Like I did, I'm going to leave teaching, I'm going to do something else. You know, most people I work with who want to stay in teaching, and they can make some changes, small changes that can make a big difference to them. So it's just getting you to consider, what action can you take today? What's that one small step that you could take today that might make a difference to you? So I'd like you just to, reflect on this a bit. Think about burnout doesn't happen overnight. It happens over a more sustained, longer period of time. You can acknowledge the signs early and recognize them early. There's little steps you can take so you don't get to that place where you just feel, I can't even go anywhere. I've just got nothing left. You're on your knees. If you like the podcast, please subscribe. Follow me, whether it's on LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, or even Instagram. I'm on all those platforms. Give us a follow. Send us a message. Let me know what you thought of the podcast. Is there anything else that you'd like to see? So I hope you enjoyed the podcast today, and I hope you take the time to look over what we've been speaking about and think about what can you do? What changes can you make so that you end up being happy and having a smile on your face and not being burned out? Take care.